The Nazis were just a few years before that. Now the Arabs, before that there were the Greeks and the Romans, and everybody's always trying to kill us. And so the Arabs are just one more in a long line of people who wanted to kill us, but miraculously we were able to defeat them and establish a Jewish state. And within 12 months, the Jewish state was established, these Arabs were defeated, and so on. And this makes sense because we are the descendants of King David, who beat Goliath. And we are the descendants of the Maccabees, who defeated great empires. So in terms of the narrative, this makes perfect sense. And as you grow up as a child learning this, it's a wonderful story. And you really want to believe that, particularly in my case, when my father was an officer in, these Jewish forces, the Zionist forces that fought in 1948. But when we take a closer look at what actually took place at that time and at that place, things look a little bit different. When we look at the two communities, both the Jewish community, that, like I said, numbered less than 500,000, and the Palestinian community, numbered almost 1.5 million, we see two communities that were expecting to become states. So they had institutions of state. And they did everything they could in order to be recognized as a state. But there was one thing that the Jewish community, and really we should call them the Zionist community, because these were Jews who followed the call of Zionism to create this Jewish state in Palestine. The Zionist community developed one thing that the Palestinians never did, and that was a militia. It was a fighting force. So by that time, the Zionist militias numbered close to 40,000 very well-trained, well-armed, and very well-indoctrinated young men. And like I said, my father was an officer in that militia. There was no equivalent on the Palestinian side. There was no Palestinian militia. There was no Palestinian army. In fact, there never has been a Palestinian army to this day. So who are these Arabs that attacked? Now, we know that the Arab states didn't intervene until much later, till later on, 6, 7 months later. So who are the Arabs that attacked in 1947? Well, there were no Arabs that attacked, because as soon as this resolution was accepted by the United Nations, the Zionist forces began a campaign of terrorizing and ethnic cleansing that lasted 12 months, at the end of which the State of Israel was established. Then later on, when the Arab armies did intervene, they were defeated very easily by the Zionist forces. So now, when we take a look at this picture, what were they able to do in 12 months? They were able to conquer almost 80% of the country. They were able to displace close to 1 million people. And they were able to destroy hundreds and hundreds of towns and cities and villages, some of them that went back with a history of 1,000 years and more, including churches and mosques and schools and of course homes and everything else, completely destroy them. And this they were able to do within a 12-month period. But now the story makes sense because there was no opposition, or there was very little opposition. And that's how they were able to do this. Now, one of the things that I do in the book is I go back between the history and the story of the state and the land and its people and in my own family and how they influenced it and how they took part. And there's a story. This is my mother when she was young. And my mother was born and raised in Jerusalem. She's 86 years old now. She still lives in Jerusalem. And this is a story that she told me many, many times as I was growing up. And she was 22 years old. It was 1948. The war was going on. My father was in the front fighting for the cause. And she was already a mother, and she was living with my older siblings in a small apartment with her mother in Jerusalem. Now, when I say Jerusalem, I don't mean the old city of Jerusalem. I mean the neighborhoods that were outside of Jerusalem, what's considered West Jerusalem, and later on became the Israeli side of Jerusalem. And there were many Palestinian neighborhoods there, very well-to-do neighborhoods. In fact, many of those homes are still there. And if you've been to Jerusalem, you see these homes. They're very distinct neighborhoods and very distinct, beautiful homes. Well, when the Zionist forces came in, they took those neighborhoods, they forced the people into exile, the inhabitants into exile. And these homes were made available for Israeli families. And my mother was offered one of these homes. And like I say, I can't remember when she told me this the first time, but I remember hearing it my entire life. And then when I was working on the book, we talked about it more. And she always talks about the story with the exact same emotion. And the way she says it, she says, how could I possibly take the home of another family? How could I possibly move into the home of another mother that now has to raise her family in exile? And then she goes on to describe the loot, how the Zionist forces filled their trucks with loot, furniture, and rugs. And you may have heard rare manuscripts and thousands of books And how were they not ashamed? And she always expresses a sense of shame having seen these Israelis do this. And she says the story, this is also part of the story, is that when the Israeli forces came in to these homes, the coffee was still warm on the table. In other words, the families had just, now what was interesting is that this story always bothered me, and it wasn't until I was actually working on the book that I could reconcile why it was bothering me. The story actually contradicts the national narrative, because she's expressing a moral dilemma here. And the way the narrative is, the Israeli narrative, is there is no moral dilemma here at all. Because they attacked us, we won, and they left. So there's no moral dilemma in taking their home. What she's presenting is in a way that we did something wrong. Now, not only is she presenting in a way that we did something wrong, but there's no excuse to it. And typically in Israeli discourse, even when we acknowledge situations where Israel did something wrong, for example, the massacre of Deir Yassin, which was a village in the outskirts of Jerusalem that had surrendered, and the Zionist forces committed a terrible massacre there. And this is acknowledged, and this is taught in Israeli school books. But the way this is taught is that Chaim Weizmann, who was later the first president of the State of Israel, said that although the massacre was a terrible thing, thanks to the massacre, thousands of Arabs fled, and this allowed us to become, or to create, a Jewish majority. So even though the massacre was bad, in the end there was a good outcome. And this is typically how we talk about things when we do acknowledge them as Israelis, that we did wrong, there's always a good outcome. There's always something good that happened to us, and so maybe it's not so bad. She didn't do that. There was no